CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Sudan signs peace deal with rebel groups from Darfur. U.S. and Israeli officials in the UAE to finalize a deal normalizing ties. And charity organization Save the Children warns that 70,000 African children face starvation due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories making headlines this hour. In your business news, Egypt's investment banks rule out new IPOs until the end of the year. And in sport, Tanzanian football coach Edna Lima hopes her success will open more opportunities for women in the game. Let's begin the hour up north, where Sudan's transitional government has signed a peace deal with an alliance of rebel groups known as the Sudan's Revolutionary Front. The agreement was signed on Monday in South Sudan's capital, Juba. It's hoped the peace accord will end 17 years of civil war in Sudan. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
The agreement is between Sudan's new government and an alliance of 9 rebel groups from the western region of Darfur, South Kordofan and Blue Nile. The deal includes a security arrangement that dictates that opposition forces be integrated into Sudan's armed forces. The peace agreement gives more powers to state and local governments. It also provides for a transitional justice and a return of people who fled their homes due to war and reparation.
By signing the comprehensive peace agreement today, we will have turned the page on war forever. And I see this historic moment to call upon the other opposition movements to join peace now and not tomorrow, and to forever renounce fighting.
However, a faction of Sudan Liberation Movement led by Abdel Wahid Al-Nur and a group of the Sudan People's Liberation Movement North, headed by Abdelaziz Al-Hilu, have rejected the security arrangement and are not part of the deal. They say they don't want their armies integrated into Sudan armed forces at least for the next 20 years. Sudan's government says it will continue to engage the groups to reach a peaceful settlement.
This peace agreement covers the political situation and security arrangements in the whole of Sudan, and also the economic situation. Full development will only be realized in our country by this comprehensive peace agreement.
The rebel forces have been fighting against what they say was economic and political marginalization by the government of former President Omar al-Bashir. The opposition forces are largely from the non-Arab minority groups. Peace talks have been going on in South Sudan for a year.
I would like to express my appreciation to the parties for accepting the call for a just and peaceful settlement of the conflict through political dialogue, and for accepting our offer for mediation.
The United Nations says about 300,000 people have been killed in Darfur since rebels took up arms there in 2003. Sudan's transitional government says it is committed to ending violence in the country. Previous peace deals, including one signed in Nigeria in 2006 and Qatar in 2010 during the time of former President Omar al-Bashir, failed to end civil wars, but the new deal signed in Juba is raising hope among many Sudanese people who say there is now a new government in Khartoum that they believe will implement the agreement. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Let's turn to Mauritius now, where a ship collision has left 2 people dead. A tugboat and a barge collided on Monday, sinking the tugboat. Both vessels were taking part in the salvage operation for the MV Wakashio ship. The MV Wakashio ship ran aground in July, causing tons of fuel to spill. Earlier reports stated the barge was carrying oil from the wrecked ship. The Prime Minister has said the barge did not seem to be transporting oil at the time of the sinking. He also confirmed 4 crew members had been rescued overnight. A search and rescue operation is ongoing to the 2 crew members still lost at sea. The specialized gender-based violence bureaus will be established across 150,000 police stations in South Africa. This is aimed at dealing with the scourge of violence. The country's police minister, Bekilele, announced the move during a meeting of ministers to address the issue of the capacity of the criminal justice system to combat gender-based violence and femicide. CGTN's Wildebeest Jamila brings us more.
Gender-based violence in South Africa is an enormous problem. Every 3 hours, according to Statistics South Africa, a woman is killed here. Many die at the hands of their loved ones. The violence has now reached critical proportions. Women and children suffer on a daily basis, and government has acknowledged this. As a result of this menace, government has introduced many measures to deal with it. But government has also admitted that it's hard to eradicate this blight and need broader society to assist.
We are dependent on communities for information. We are dependent on witnesses to give witness statements. The sooner we can get that evidence, the easier it is for us as prosecutors when we get up in a court to say, here you are dealing with a perpetrator. On the face of it, at this early stage, this is what the person has done. And this is the evidence that we already have collected to tell the court how serious it is and that this person is linked to that evidence. That, I guarantee, will put us in a position then to ensure that we keep that individual in custody.
Despite efforts by the South African government to address violence against women and children, the scourge continues to escalate. The latest statistics indicate that femicide increased by 7% between 2016 and 2017. That's 5 times the global average. According to the 2019 South African Police Services Crime Statistics Report, femicide increased by 11% over the last 3 years alone. The scourge affects even the police officers who are meant to deal with it.
Just imagine the female magistrate that is trying the rape case. She was raped previous night herself. The advocate that is representing was raped. So it's not just out there. We start from within, and these issues and these programs must be really brought in and empower everybody. So we'll have to work hard on prevention rather than reaction.
Minister Cele acknowledged that government has been left wanting on many occasions.
The treatment of some complainants of domestic violence at police station remains a concern. Ladies and gentlemen, those officers who choose not to comply with the policy of SAPS, which is to treat victims with respect and dignity, those officers who shame us by turning victims away don't have a place in the South African Police Service. Such acts are dereliction of duty.
In an effort to curb this violence, Police Minister Bekilele says specialized gender-based violence desks will now be established. The desks, according to the minister, will now be more than ever be victim-centered. Wildebeest Jamila for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
Access to clean water has been a major challenge in most parts of Africa. This has compromised efforts to break the cycle of poverty on the continent. But a college in central Kenya is making a difference in the lives of the local community with its innovation of simple water harvesting technology. CGTN's Nick Mudimba reports.
Lack of water presents insurmountable challenges. One can't grow food, stay healthy, and even attend school. Life comes to a standstill. 160 kilometers from Kenya's capital, Nairobi, is Mukurweini Technical Training Institute. They faced criticism from the community for building the institution on top of a hill. The pre-existing water distribution system in the area was gravity-fed, forcing the institute located at the top of a hill to ration water among its staff and students. Meanwhile, the nearby low-lying villages also struggled to cope with the massive surface runoff caused by the heavy rains, causing incessant conflict with the institute.
There was a lot of erosion, and therefore the water used to flood into the homesteads of these villages, whereby their latrines could get full. I remember one time I came in the morning and found villagers in my reception saying that students could not, young children, they were with them, could not go to school. It was very hurting for me.
Something had to be done. The institution invested in a new roof water harvesting system, including a channeling and piping system, a pond with 3,000 cubic meters of capacity, a water tower, and a solar-powered pump.
When it rained, all this rainwater from the technical institutes used to flow and overflood our villages. As neighbors, we decided to confront the school's management to help us out of the seasonal troubles. The dam project came, and since it was built and the water harvesting started, our problems ended.
But now things have changed. Instead of simply running off, the rainwater is now channeled into the pond and then pumped to the tower for storage. Students and workers from the nearby villages gather to clean the 3,000 cubic meters water tray.
You can tell those villagers might not be able to pay the metered water many other times that it happens that way. Is it true? But now, students can come for water from the institute and use them where they are. That's a benefit you cannot foresee. We have got the food, which we grow from our farm. We normally sell it as subsidized cost to our students to go and cook where they are. We also take it to our cafeteria. Our cafeteria sells food to students at a cost of 30 to 40 shillings.
Fresh tap water is readily available to the locals. Farming activities have picked up, and students from poor backgrounds benefit from a work for study scheme. The young men and women from this locality are now able to actually go to school without any troubles. The water harvesting pond has changed their lives. It's been a difficult season whereby sometimes the flooding affects the lifestyles in the villages, but right now they're able to learn, eat healthy, and of course all that courtesy of the water harvesting pond. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Nyeri County, Kenya.
Let's now take a look at news making headlines from outside the continent. Top U.S. and Israeli officials are in Dubai to finalize the normalization of relations between the Gulf nation and Israel. White House senior advisor Jared Kushner says Washington can help maintain Israel's military dominance while advancing its ties to the UAE. Palestinians have been dismayed by the UAE's move, calling it a betrayal. The normalization deal was announced on August the 13th. It is the first official accommodation between an Arab country and Israel in more than 20 years. The French president is on his second trip to Lebanon in less than a month. Emmanuel Macron was the first foreign leader to visit Beirut after a deadly explosion that took place on August the 4th, which forced the government to resign. Macron intends to help break the political impasse. He says he has returned to push for more reform. Tony Waterman explains.
French President Emmanuel Macron's visit, his second in less than a month, is meant to apply pressure on Lebanese officials to carry out some desperately needed reforms. Macron has demanded deep change for the country, which was already on the verge of collapse before a deadly port explosion ripped through the capital, Beirut, on August 4th. Now, this pressure is part of the reason why Lebanese officials scrambled to nominate a new prime minister on Monday, the very day that Macron is arriving. Mustafa Adib is the man that they have chosen. He's a more obscure politician, currently serves as the ambassador to Germany, but being from a political fringe could actually work in his favor. The blast, which was the result of government ineptitude, amplified calls for a change to the political order and the removal of the political elite. Adib now takes on the unenviable task of steering the crisis-riddled country in the aftermath of that explosion, which left at least 190 people dead, thousands injured, and tens of thousands displaced. A new World Bank report on Monday said that the blast caused up to $4.6 billion in physical damage. That comes on top of an already sinking economy. The currency has lost more than 80% of its value. Unemployment has surged, and nearly half of the people in Lebanon are living below the poverty line.
In these trying times, especially after the devastating blast at the port that killed, injured, and left many people missing, there is no time for talking, promises, and wishes. It's time for everyone to cooperate to heal our country and bring back hope to our people.
Now, talks to secure a $10 billion loan from the IMF, they collapsed in July, but in the aftermath of the explosion, the IMF said that it was willing to redouble its efforts, but only if the country's institutions showed a willingness to carry out much-needed reforms. The hope is that this new government will do just that, and President Macron, who will be meeting with officials and checking in on the cleanup effort, will be hawkishly watching over to make sure that those reforms happen. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Paris.
Let's go over to the U.S., where President Donald Trump has come out in defense of a 17-year-old accused of killing 2 protesters in Kenosha, Wisconsin.
You saw the same tape as I saw, and he was trying to get away from them, I guess, it looks like, and he fell, and then they very violently attacked him. And it was something that we're looking at right now, and it's under investigation. But I guess he was in very big trouble. He probably would have been killed.
Kyle Rittenhouse is facing charges including 2 counts of first-degree homicide. He says he was acting in self-defense after bringing a gun to a protest last week. A photo circulated online after the shooting shows Rittenhouse in the front row at a Trump rally earlier this year. Law and order is one of the main themes of Trump's re-election campaign. On Monday, his rival Joe Biden blamed President Trump for stirring chaos.
Fires are burning, and we have a president who fans the flames rather than fighting the flames. But we must not burn. We have to build. This president, long ago, forfeited any moral leadership in this country. His failure to call on his own supporters to stop acting as an armed militia in this country shows how weak he is. Does anyone believe there'll be less violence in America if Donald Trump is reelected?
Well, let's not take a short break and return. More news, including charity organization Save the Children warns that 70,000 African children face starvation due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And Ghana is set to reopen air travel, with travelers required to produce COVID-19 free certificates on arrival.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Well, let's go back to that top story we had at the top of the hour, where a ship collision in Mauritius had left 2 people dead. A tugboat and a barge collided on Monday, sinking the tugboat. Both vessels were taking part in the salvage operation for the MV Waukesha ship. The ship ran aground in July, causing tons of fuel to spill. Early reports stated the barge was carrying oil from the wrecked ship. The Prime Minister of Mauritius has said the barge did not seem to be transporting oil, though, at the time of the sinking. He also confirmed that 4 crew members had been rescued overnight. A search and rescue operation is ongoing for 2 crew members who are still lost at sea. Well, let's not take a closer look at this story with Lou Feifei, who's standing by from Poudre d'Or in Mauritius for us. Feifei, what more can you tell us about the latest developments, and particularly about that rescue operation that's underway?
So basically last night at about 7:30 p.m., residents along the coast here at Port d'Or began making phone calls to the National Coast Guard when they saw the lights of two ships that seemed to be in distress out beyond the reef. Now this reef is approximately, I would say, 4 kilometers out, so they couldn't get a clear visual, but they could clearly see that the lights in the ship was not doing a normal course of operations. So they began alerting the Coast Guards, and from what we understand, the circumstances of why the tugboat Sir Galan Duval and the barge it was accompanying were doing at that hour is still coming to light and evolving. We do know that they were traveling from the site of the Wakashio spill, which is about 35 kilometers south of what we are. Now that shipwreck happened on the southeast coast. Here we are about 35 miles up the coast in the north coast of Mauritius. And it seemed that there was very bad weather last night with high winds. And perhaps because of this, the tugboat that is collided with the barge that it was accompanying. And as a consequence of that, the crew members were dumped into the sea. And immediately thereafter, there was a tour operator, we now believe, together with the National Coast Guard, who arrived on the scene and were able to immediately rescue four of the eight crew members. And now 2 have been confirmed dead. And as you mentioned, the rescue operation is ongoing. The latest news is that maybe perhaps 1 additional body has been found, possibly bringing the death toll to 3, but that is still to be confirmed. And the remaining body is still being looked for at this moment with the National Coast Guard. We do further understand that Prime Minister Praveen Jugnauth has...
Thank you so much for that, Feifei. Feifei, that she was standing by for us in Port d'Or in Mauritius, just giving us an update on that story, the latest that's coming out of there, of that collision that took place. We do apologize for the poor sound there. We will have more from Feifei because this is a developing story and she will be keeping a tab on that for us. Well, a relief organization, Save the Children, says around 67,000 children in sub-Saharan Africa are at risk of dying from extreme hunger. It reports that hundreds of thousands more are malnourished. The organization is blaming the dire situation on the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. Analysts by Save the Children, based on data taken from the Lancet, indicates that an average of 426 children per day are at risk of death unless urgent action is taken. The report says the pandemic has worsened a bad situation created by floods, locust invasions, and soaring food prices. The organization says that it had an impact on families, with many children going without food. The NGO added that many communities did not grow food crop due to the conflict. Well, for more on that story, it's a quite worrying prediction there. Let's get you more on this from Jason Juru, who is a nutrition technical specialist with Save the Children here in Kenya. James, thank you so much for joining us. That's a disturbing picture that we've just heard of there and that your report has painted. But how badly have children been affected by the global pandemic?
Yeah, thank you so much. Like you've said, my name is James Njiro from Save the Children. And actually, this report is the fact on the ground. And COVID-19 has just come to exacerbate already a dire food security and nutrition situation. Because children are the most affected, in the sense that whatever happens at the household in terms of changes in dietary intake and access to food, then children and pregnant and lactating women bear the biggest brunt. As Save the Children, working in these areas and also working in Kenya, we have seen access to food becoming more and more a challenge at household level because of the way COVID-19 pandemic has affected households' livelihood.
James, I would like to ask, and I was just about to ask now, what organizations like yours are doing to help the situation.
Yes, one of the strategies that Save the Children is doing is actually providing like some safety nets, cash transfers, to very vulnerable households. We're also working with the households to identify livelihood sources that could aid the households to access food and put food on the table. We are also increasing access to healthcare, because what we have also noted, the pandemic has caused a reduction in care-seeking behavior at health facilities, and even the routine health and nutrition services in the Ministry of Health and in the health sector has gone down. So we are working with the communities to make these services available to them through outreach services, and ensuring that the communities and community health volunteers adhere to the COVID-19 containment measures.
And what I wanted to also ask you there, James, is what do you think African governments need to do to protect children from the impact of this pandemic?
Yeah, there is a lot that government could do. One, first of all, is to provide the PPEs to the health workers and community health volunteers so that they can continue offering these very essential services. The government also needs to ensure that the containment measures and the risk communication goes out to every community, including at household level. So we have seen good efforts from government on that side, but we still have a big room for improvement, in the sense that households that really cannot access food, they need support. They need to be cushioned against this pandemic, because we've seen many households losing their livelihood, and they completely cannot be able to put food on the table, and even for the children. We have also seen now children are at home. There are children who previously were benefiting from school meals program, and they were having feeding programs at school. Those children are at home, and when they cannot access any food, then government can come in there and provide some safety net strategies to those children, so that they can continue accessing the nutrients they need.
Thank you so much for that, James. And as your organization said, a very dire situation, and not just in Kenya, but across the continent. Thank you so much for that. That was James Njuru, who is a nutrition specialist with Save the Children here in Kenya. Well, let's move on to West Africa, where Ghana is set to reopen air travel. President Nana Akufo-Addo has made the announcement after nearly 5 months of shutdown due to the coronavirus. This follows a drop in new cases in the country. The aviation industry says it's set to resume business with measures in place to avoid further infections. So far, the country is close to 45,000 cases and nearly 300 deaths. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra.
A final disinfection of offices at the Kotoka International Airport in Accra. Ghana says it is now ready to reopen its airspace for international travel.
It is mandatory for any airline coming to Ghana to ensure that passengers have face masks on. But we know that some of our people will be coming from afar. If you are traveling from London, you probably travel like 6 hours. And so when you land at Kotoka Airport and you come through the passenger boarding bridge, when you get to the edge of entering the terminal building, we give you a fresh face mask.
Airport officials say they will ensure safe distancing among passengers at the airport terminals, as well as limit the number of people that come to welcome visitors at the airport. Both departing and arriving passengers will also have their temperatures taken and made to sanitize their hands.
We intend to make the operational system smooth, with very little inconvenience for the arriving and departing passengers. To be specific, the stakeholders have brought about significant physical transformation of the halls, that's the arrival and departure, with new infrastructure, including the installation of COVID-19 testing devices.
Like many countries, Ghana's aviation industry has been hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic. The country's civil aviation authority says it has lost almost 95% of its revenue due to a ban on foreign travel since March. As the country's airspace begins to reopen for international traffic, it hopes things can begin to improve.
Port health officials say all passengers will be made to take a mandatory COVID-19 test when they land at this airport, and they will have to bear the cost of $150 for the test.
The test result is expected to be ready within 30 minutes. Passengers who test negative will be allowed to leave the airport, while those who test positive for COVID-19 will be isolated by port health officials for further assessment. With these measures put in place, the government hopes the aviation industry can once again take off. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
We'll have some business news for you after the break. Here are some highlights. Egypt's investment banks rule out new IPOs until the end of the year. The South African government eases travel restrictions, banks on domestic tourism.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Investment bankers in the Egyptian market have ruled out any new offerings on the country's bourse for the rest of 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This includes offerings at the level of private sector companies or government tenders. CGTN's Yasser Hakim explores some of the effects that these new rules could have on companies and the stock market.
The Egyptian exchange market has been shocked to hear that new public offerings have been scrapped for now. Investment banks have opted to wait to monitor how the COVID-19 pandemic pans out. Only 2 initial public offerings have been made in 2020. This is seen as a reflection of concerns related to the pandemic.
We can say that the losses have been limited. That's because the government gave huge support to the Egyptian Stock Exchange, and central bank pumped £20 billion into the market to make up for the losses and avoid a major shock.
The same has happened with the government's privatization plan. The Minister of Public Enterprises announced that he ordered the 20 state-owned companies and banks to postpone the sale of stocks to the private sector till next year.
Privatization in the current climate will mean the prices of state-owned companies will be unfairly low, so they will use the time to reorganize their structures so that the next year they could attract better offers.
Some experts believe these decisions have not come as a surprise. They just hope the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic would diminish as soon as possible to avoid more losses for the companies and the stock exchange. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, following a 5-month lockdown, South Africa is easing domestic travel restrictions, allowing hotels to reopen. With international borders still closed, the government is pinning its hopes on domestic tourism, echoing a strategy being tried from Vietnam to New Zealand with mixed results. CGTN's Alexandria Majala reports.
Most of Cape Town's tourist hotspots are normally abuzz with tourists from around the world. But today, these same sites are mostly empty, with only a few local customers coming in now and then to enjoy the city's scenic views.
We have done a 50% off on all of our properties. The reason for that really is to get South Africans to engage in a staycation and enjoy their own country, which I think a lot of South Africans will do, although financially a lot of them also been hit quite hard.
South Africa remains among the countries hardest hit by the pandemic. And with recession-battered consumers watching their pocketbooks, many in the sector foresee an uphill task. Of tourism businesses responding to a recent government survey, 64% were unable to service their debts in May and 67% could not meet fixed costs. To cope, many businesses have laid off staff or slashed wages. Others have gone bust.
The hardest hit obviously been the hotels. Most of our hotels are kind of upper end here, so most of the 5-6-star hotels are closed and they don't intend to open before December. After the hotels, the next worst hit has been restaurants. We've got about 80 restaurants within the waterfront and all of them closed.
Last year, South Africa welcomed over 10 million international visitors. SA Tourism, the sector's marketing agency, was targeting 8.7% year-on-year growth in inbound arrivals in 2020, with total tourist spending projected to reach $16.2 billion. But COVID-19 brought the sector to a screeching halt as governments closed borders and imposed lockdowns.
The closing of our borders has impacted us because 70% of our tourists are international, especially in the Safari Lodge properties. So at this point, those properties are not being booked at all. Local tourism really in Cape Town it can survive, but it's at a hugely reduced rate. So for us, we really are opening just for the purpose of keeping our staff employed.
According to SA Tourism, nearly 440,000 tourism jobs are at risk this year. The sector is expected to lose 75% of projected revenues, which is $4.7 billion. With South Africans now permitted to voyage between provinces for the first time since March, tourist-focused businesses are pivoting to domestic travelers in a bid to stay afloat. In a sign of faith in domestic travelers, restaurants on the city's waterfront are recalling furloughed staff, and game reserves further inland have begun preparing campsites for visitors. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Time for us to take a short break. Here's what you can expect when we return. Coming up in our continuing series on the CGTN Digital Safaris, we take a look at some of South Africa's wildlife attractions.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back onto our new series called Jumbo Studio. We focus on the effects of the pandemic on the tourism sector in Kenya. Our CGTN crew has just returned from the Masai Mara, where the annual Wildebeest migration is on. However, it is business unusual as tourism investors and locals live on the most of the event. This is a migration amid a contagion.
The Mara, a jewel of Kenya's tourism. It's a shared ecosystem with Tanzania's Serengeti National Park, whose wildlife is the pride of the East African region. So famous is the Mara Game Reserve that it attracts thousands of tourists from near and far. Its diverse wildlife, popular tourist attractions, and a welcoming local community make the Mara stand tall among its regional competitors. Apart from the big five, cheetahs, hyenas, servals, and bat-eared foxes are also found here. One of the Mara's most prized events is the annual Wildebeest migration. It is a spectacle to behold. Around 1 million wildebeest and other migratory animals like zebra cross the Mara River from the Serengeti National Park into the Masai Mara Game Reserve. They come in search of pasture and to mate. But with predators circling the scene, it is a life and death exercise. There are crocodiles in the water, lions, cheetahs, and even hyenas lie in wait on land. It is a journey of challenges and dangers. It is Mother Nature at one of her finest and most exhilarating moments. So phenomenal is the migration that it draws thousands of foreign and local tourists, raking in millions of dollars every year for the sector. Now, many locals, directly or indirectly, are dependent on tourism. Some foreigners too are here as workers or investors. Regardless of who benefits or how, this is the annual season for a windfall. Once again, the season is here and the Mara is the place to be. However, this year's migration comes at a time when Kenya, like the rest of the world, is battling the COVID-19 pandemic, a migration amid a contagion. Kenya reported its first case of COVID-19 on the 15th of March. Almost immediately, the country went into a partial lockdown. Coronavirus cases are still on the rise, now surpassing 30,000. It's clear the economy has not been spared, with tourism, one of Kenya's biggest foreign exchange earners, taking the hardest hit. Flight bans and border closures were implemented across the world to curb the spread of the virus, forcing Kenya's tourist hotspots to shut down or drastically scale down operations. The effects have been devastating. So hard are the times that Kenya's Tourism Cabinet Secretary could only lament about it. In the past month, restrictions have been relaxed, flights have resumed and hotels have reopened. However, unlike previous years, there are noticeably fewer foreign tourists in the Mara. Hit by the dwindling number of foreign tourists from the traditional markets of China, Europe and the United States, Kenya is now looking inwards. It's turning to the local market. With special packages and reduced prices, the country is hoping to keep this vital sector afloat until the dark cloud of the coronavirus goes away. But for a local population that is already suffering the economic effects of COVID-19, how cheap is cheap? It's business unusual here at the Mara. Social distancing, hand washing, sanitizing, as well as the wearing of face masks are some of the measures being pushed by government, protocols that hotels must adhere to.
It just happened to be fortunate enough for us that COVID happened. Normally during this time, it's not very easy for us to get access to such places.
Pleasure to meet you. Good to meet you too. Actually, before we came back, we had to follow the strict rules put by the Ministry of Health and the Kenyan government to combat the spread of the coronavirus. And we put measures, like when you checked in, you see that there was you wash your hands, you sanitize, we check your temperatures, and put on your masks.
Human-wildlife conflict is a thorny issue in these parts. The indigenous people of this land, the Maasai, are considered custodians of Kenya's wildlife. But when their livestock are attacked or their settlements destroyed by wild animals, the Maasai have fought back. Wild animals have been poisoned. This continues to be a source of tension between the local community, conservationists and the government.
Human-wildlife conflict is a big issue here in the Mara, and it's a bit high normally when it's raining. When we have long grass in the reserve and in the conservancies, then you will have playing games going out to the community areas. And they take along with them predators. Elephants also try to find their way to other areas outside the national reserve. And they come in contact with people.
If you're looking to understand what's changed in the Mara due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the answer is in the silence. The rumbling of flights arriving and departing, the consistent hum of off-road vehicles have all been replaced by the sounds of nature in their untouched glory.
Yeah, it's very interesting, although, well, I mean, people are affected in terms of, their livelihood. But in terms of nature and wildlife, I think they thrived. because less disturbance. We have had cheetahs doing their hands very well without so many cameras.
A blessing for some, certainly, but the silence is a cause of concern for the local community whose livelihoods revolve around the presence of foreign and local tourists. The silence is a reality check that is now sinking in.
Immediately after lockdown have just came in, with no international flight coming in. Mara had been a very, very terrible place to be. People are living like in a very terrible state. I mean, like they don't grow crops, so source of income was tourism, coming here and promoting them here.
As the sun sets in the Mara, only time can tell when it will rise again on global tourism. This is a sector that generates 9% of Africa's income, and with efforts to find a vaccine for the coronavirus in top gear, over 100 million jobs in the tourism and hospitality sector across the world are at risk.
And as we always mention, magical Kenya. And I'm in the majestic Mara. So guys, you're most welcome to come, visit us, enjoy. We say Tembea Kenya, and all the COVID protocols are in place.
As the cold occasioned by the coronavirus reigns globally, Kenyans and locally based foreigners are metaphorically chopping their own firewood just to keep warm. Many here are hoping for better days ahead. For hope is a good thing, and good things never die.
Well, Africa is truly blessed with breathtaking wilderness. With our digital safari series, we've had a chance to follow wildebeest migration at Kenya's Masai Mara. For today, we'll wrap things up in the Masai Mara and then head to South Africa to catch up with a leopardess.
Yesterday on CGTN's Digital Safari, in the Masai Mara, large herds began forming near the river of life and death, showing remarkable serenity as they ambled in a single file towards the river's edge. However, some lonely outcasts didn't have the security the big herds provided, for they had been kicked out and forced to fend for themselves. Meanwhile, in a much colder South Africa, Tlalamba was spotted in Djuma, comfortable and safely perched on a fallen tree, while the Djuma clan of hyenas were lurking close by, hoping that Tlalamba would provide them with a feast or at least some scraps. Over in Pride Lands, a couple of hyenas caught a lucky break as they happened upon an unclaimed impala carcass. After a short squabble, the larger of the hyenas took the majority of the kill into the bush, while the loser had to search the area for any leftover offcuts. The banquet continued over in Pinda. A small pride of lions were hungrily devouring a zebra. Covered in blood and clearly satisfied, they spent the rest of the morning fighting off the effects of their food coma. Back in Djuma, a large herd of elephants was discovered. While most of them browsed the surrounding green thorn and torchwood trees, the mischievous young calves, still feeding from their mothers, decided that this was the perfect moment to amuse themselves and bend some rules. The elephants over in Pride Lands were also in a playful mood, showing off with peculiar stances and strange curtsy maneuvers. However, for some, all this activity was too much. Join us every day at 4:30 GMT on CGTN digital platforms for your very own virtual safari through the African wild.
Your sport news is coming up after the break. Here's what you can expect. Tanzanian football coach Edna Lima hopes her success will open more opportunities for women in the game.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
It's time now for your sport news. Well, according to FIFA data from a 2019 survey, women coaches account for just 7% of licensed football coaches worldwide. Tanzania's Edna Lima is one of a handful of female football coaches. She's currently the assistant coach of Twiga Stars, which is the country's national women's soccer team. Edna's journey to the top, however, has not been an easy one. Here's CGTN's Isaac Lucando with her story.
Edna Lema never thought she would one day become a football coach. Discouragement, few opportunities, and no female role models made her path a difficult one. She credits her confidence and the Tanzanian Football Federation, TFF, for where she is now.
I can say they're behind my success through the immense support they continue to give me to ensure I reach my goals. This is because when you talk of the 3 female coaches in the country, Edna Lema's name is one of them. So I'm grateful to TFF and I believe they have good plans for me.
Edna has been coaching the women's under-17 national team for 4 years now. Protasia, a national team player, says there's an advantage to having a female coach.
We see her as a mother or a sister, so there are some things that are easier to approach her as opposed to a male. She gets ample time to talk to us in our changing rooms. Male coaches can't do such a thing.
According to FIFA, of the 200 licensed coaches in Tanzania, women make up less than 5% of that number. As part of commitment to increase the opportunities that exist within football for female coaches, the World Football Governing Body FIFA started a mentorship program in 2018, enabling women in the game to acquire new knowledge, skills and experience that they can harness in their careers, ultimately addressing the disproportionate representation of female coaches in football. Female coaches still face skepticism from some Tanzanian fans, but many are supportive.
They are quite capable. If they attend more courses, they'll do even better. Because even if you look at their performance, female teams did well in various competitions last year and even went on to finals.
Globally, only a handful of female coaches have crossed over to coach men's teams. Edna is optimistic that she may be the first to do so in Tanzanian football.
So I want to see myself one day teach a male team at whatever level, to see that I can successfully execute what I envision as I face the men.
With every coaching session, Edna hopes and prays for a future that has more women coaching the game she loves. Isaac Lucando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
The 2020 edition of the Nairobi Standard Chartered Marathon, initially scheduled for October the 25th, has been cancelled by organizers due to the uncertainties brought about by the pandemic. With a ban on public gatherings, sponsors Standard Chartered have called off the annual race. It's the first time this has happened in 17 years. Organizers say they had considered planning the event virtually, but feared it could not be implemented, as its success still required a majority of participants to leave their homes, a move that could compromise coronavirus preventative measures. Well, Lionel Messi missed Barcelona's first training session